The opinions, viewpoints, and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
And hello everyone, and good evening, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of Scarefest Radio. The original broadcast date is May 24th, 2019. Happy Memorial Day weekend. My God, this year is going down the tubes quickly. Summer's here, it's going to be Scarefest, and then next thing you know, I got to go Christmas shopping. Jesus H. Christ. I do have a couple things I want to go over here. First of all, congratulations to the FedEx company for taking 8 days to get a package from Kentucky to fucking Nebraska. Raise them rates one more time. You've almost got it perfect. Can you tell I'm in a mood, everybody? Now, I will say, we finally had some beautiful weather here in Kentucky. It has been hot, but we have managed to be hot, cloudy, and rainy every day. But today was a beautiful day. And did I burn my bald spot? Okay, did it? She says I did not burn my bald spot. The one that she pointed out to me about a month ago. Anyway. So, tonight our guest is Ronald Murphy. Now he's going to be speaking at the Scarefest. He's terribly overqualified to do this show, but he is professionally published short stories, poetry, and a play produced. He has written one novella entitled Ronald Dragonslayer. He's written an allegorical horror novel centering on werewolves in suburbia. A collection of stuff. He's been on Coast to Coast AM. He is, like I said, Ronald, would you believe that when I was talking about you last week, when we announced that you were speaking, Ken Boggle had the balls to ask me, "Oh, you haven't been on Coast to Coast AM?" Was Coast to Coast AM everything you dreamed it would be?
I will tell you, I had a 2-hour spot on there. George Norrie found out that I did some independent acting whenever I was a little bit younger. So the first hour we talked about nothing but his friend who happens to be an actor. So I was able to promote my book for maybe 20 minutes. We talked about the paranormal.
See, now why am I not famous? That's how I do all the time. I have done entire shows and not talked about the topic matter. But I always talk about the guest. I'm very careful about that. I just will try to get you off on tangents and find out what you had for dinner and stuff like that. So your topic coming in sounds like a fun topic, and it's something that I've hit it here on the show and my old show and the other old show. But his topic, everyone, is Shadow of the Werewolf and Vampire, Historical Encounters with These Creatures of the Night.
That's a good tagline right there, isn't it?
That covers it. Yeah, it's a Creatures of the Night. Now, first let's just get into personal beliefs a little bit.
Sure.
Now, we were talking before the show. Actually, everybody, I should have recorded. We had the best discussion before the show, and I never prep my guests, but we had a really good conversation. And one of the things we talked about was, okay, and I have stated this publicly, the North American Dogman Project. The whole Dogman phenomenon freaks me the hell out. And, for some reason, Bigfoot, I have no problem. Oh yeah, Bigfoot's in the woods, he'll avoid me. But there are these, and we'll use the word horror stories, about dogmen type things that just absolutely blow me away. Now, that was a long way of getting to what brought you to these particular areas of study.
That's a great question. My mother was a big fan of the paranormal, Bigfoot, UFOs, and such. So before we had podcasts, we had terrestrial radio. And every now and then, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And every now and then, the local radio station down there would have somebody on to discuss paranormal things, sightings and such. Well, back in the 1970s, 77 to be exact, there was a rash of Bigfoot sightings in my very small town where I grew up. And my mother would take my brother and I out, and I was 7 years old at the time, and we would go to the sites that was mentioned on these radio broadcasts looking for Bigfoot. So, I remember, 7-year-old going through the backwoods of Western Pennsylvania looking for Bigfoot with my mom. That seemed like a perfectly normal Saturday afternoon. And this really engendered in me this love for the unexplained, that there might be something out there that we simply have not, cataloged yet. So I grew up with this kind of wanderlust in me. And then I went to university and I studied literature. And then, as I'm going through these great tomes of literature, these classics of, of humanity, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you come across this character called Enkidu, which seems all the world to be what you would call a Bigfoot, a bipedal, hair-covered hominid that interacted with the human world. And then, you would find out in like Beowulf, this character of the Grendel, which crept around at night, a creature of the shadows. So we would have these anecdotal evidence of creatures that look and corresponded very much so to Bigfoot in these classic works, that have been revered for centuries, as part of, who we are. But people really didn't go very deeply into them. So I'm starting to see in these works the images of, the Bigfoot, or, the images of the vampire or the werewolf. And then I went to graduate school for history, and I just really took the love for the paranormal and paired it very nicely, kind of like a fine wine, with my love for the paranormal. And it comes out to be, the way I write. I have about 13 books out on various subjects. And the way I write, if you're a skeptic and you have an interest in this stuff, you can read my books without any problems whatsoever, because I write from a historical perspective. I'm cataloging the way different societies around the world saw these very strange and unexplained things, and how our contemporary culture kind of translates it into what we need to at this very day and age.
Now, you actually triggered something in my mind there. Okay, you found things that looked like they were referencing Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Then we've werewolves have been ingrained in the culture. I don't know. You tell me how long. I know back to the Dark Ages. Sure. Vampires about the same. Why though? In the field of cryptozoology, in the field of actual study, Bigfoot. There's a Bigfoot group. You can't walk down. You can't walk through the woods without running into a Bigfoot hunter. Werewolves via the Dogman Project is gaining a little bit in cryptozoology. Nobody takes vampires seriously from a cryptozoology. Why did Bigfoot make the cut and those other twos went Hollywood?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is.
That's two.
I think, yeah. I think there is something about the idea, a romance, about something out there that looks so much like us and acts so much like us, yet it lives in the periphery. It haunts the shadows. We never quite see it in full daylight. That is the romance of Bigfoot. Now, one of the things that makes the Dogman so kind of frightening is that this is much more bestial and much more savage. and much more hard to relate to, because whenever we would have an encounter with a Bigfoot, it's almost an awe-inspiring event, sometimes a spiritual event, even depending upon who has such an encounter. But with a dog man, it's something terrifying. And people have asked me, why aren't more people reporting dog man? And I keep on pointing out how many people vanish on their daily walks or on hikes that we never hear from again.
See, there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Now you're getting in. It's funny. Ghosts don't scare me. Bigfoot, no problem. Okay, vampires would freak me the hell out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that is, we've told the stories on the show here that, so I'm taking from what you're saying is Bigfoot needs to mutilate and eat someone.
Well, let's look at see. So if we look at the cinema now, how is Bigfoot portrayed now? Long gone is Harry and the Hendersons. So now we see things like Willow Creek, where there's a Bigfoot out there that's stalking people, hunting people, and so the majority of the Bigfoot movies produced nowadays has the Bigfoot as a very terrifying antagonist. And it's really against the nature of Bigfoot that has been reported for how many years? We think of the lumbering giant, we think of this benign forest spirit, but that doesn't sell Hollywood movie tickets. But if you make it a bloodthirsty, creature. Now,
I have to make the argument he's still behind the curve, because now the werewolves are getting all cuddly, and we watched something on Netflix, The Order or something like that, where, these are college kids and the werewolves are the good guys. We all know about Twilight.
That's right.
So somehow, I guess he needs a better agent.
he needs better marketing, doesn't he? That's right. That's right. Well, I think that it's kid friendly too. They see something, it's hair covered. You can almost pet it. It doesn't have fangs. Usually he's not portrayed as having fangs. But, the dog man, you're going on all out here. Whenever you see representations of the dog man, whether it's a Linda Godfrey, art drawing, or, something off of the Sci-Fi Channel, it's snarling. It's got the teeth. It's got the saliva dripping from the fangs. This is something to be, terrified of. And it really strikes a primal chord. Nobody wants to be stalked. Nobody wants to be considered prey. But when you're in the realm of the dog man, that's what you are. You are subjugated to this creature because you're in his territory at this point, and your God-given intelligence is not good enough to save you from its animalistic instincts.
One quick question before we go to a commercial break. Something was pointed out to me. Do you wonder if a lot of the Bigfoot sightings, especially from a distance, or could be Dogman sightings, because people aren't looking for Dogman. They're not looking for a werewolf.
That's right.
But because of TV, we are looking for Bigfoot when we're in the woods.
Sure. Before the Dogman became part of our vernacular, I was out on an expedition with an elderly gentleman who claimed that he had seen Bigfoot, and he spent the rest of his life trying to prove the existence of this so people didn't think he was crazy. But he told me a story when we were out in the middle of nowhere. He said, there are two types of Bigfoot out there. He said, one is this kind of, very benign giant creature that will do you no harm. But there's another type of Bigfoot out there. I start listening, and he said, it's much thinner. It's got a pronounced snout, and it hunts in packs. And that's the first time ever that I got a description of what you would think would be this dog man. And this was told by somebody that believed that this was just another species of a Bigfoot.
There you go. Everybody, we're going to take our first commercial break. We'll be right back with more Scarefest Radio and our guest, Ronald Murphy. Have you checked out the Mama Ruby's family of metaphysical and spiritual shows? The Mystical Fair in Lexington, Kentucky, Lexington's only monthly psychic and holistic healing arts fair. The Inner Light Festivals in Louisville in June and Lexington in November. And watch for Mama Ruby's Expo coming in 2020. Plus, Mama Ruby's Meta Lecture Series featuring interesting guests speaking on fascinating subjects. Start your journey now at mamarubies.com for more information. And welcome back, everybody, to Scarefest Radio. This weekend is Mystical Fair weekend. Saturday and Sunday, go to mysticalfairlex.com. That's down on Whipple Court in Lexington. So if you've got some time this weekend, check out the Mystical Fair. It's cheap. It's cheap and it's fun, and you can get a reading or get your foot detoxed, or I don't know if they have their masseuse this week. When they have it, they've got a really good masseuse if she's there. Also, don't forget the Inner Light Festival coming up next weekend, June 1st and 2nd in Louisville, Kentucky. InnerLightFestival.com. That's in Louisville, Kentucky. So a whole different market there. Now before we I'm going to move on to vampires, but I do have one question from the chat room, and it just goes to show you how much the marketing is different, because the question is, do you think that the Yeti, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, do you think these are all the same thing essentially?
Like the same type of creature from the same type of...
If they're kin. Yeah, we'll call them kin.
Yeah, I would think so. I think that if they look the same and they act the same, if these are indeed flesh and blood creatures, whenever we talk about the Yeti or the Yeren in China, I think that we're talking about an evolutionary dead end that was able to maintain a remnant population around the world.
Now, I'm going to bring you back to what you just said, because I happened to, I noticed how you parsed a word in there. If. And I know where you, so I'm going to take you there when we get back on werewolves. But now, okay, let's jump over to vampires. Okay. Because vampires, from the cryptozoological standpoint, don't get a lot of attention. They've been a movie icon for God knows forever. The first, from the chat room, what, by your definition, based on your research, we'll go there rather than maybe if you have some weird little belief that I don't know about, what exactly do you call what is a vampire? Other than what we see in Hollywood. Sure.
I think that when we talk about a vampire, it is somebody that needs a human host to feed off of. Typically, we think of a vampire as another human being. But, of course, we have the vampire bat, which actually that eats nothing but blood. And if we look at traditions from around the world, a Greek tradition has their vampire that feeds off of human blood. It's a seemingly ape-like creature, almost like a baboon, that comes out of rocky crevices that live underground. And you have a lot of places in Indonesia where their creatures are more bat-like. Actually, it's been supposed that there may have been, now this is something that was brought up by Linnaeus, of all people, who categorized animal genuses, that there may have been a time when evolution fooled around with a flying ape, so that there might have been a bat-like creature out there that was based upon ape ancestry. Very, very frightening. Now, of course, the bats that we have nowadays, there's no proof to that at all. But this fact was raised again in the 1980s by an Australian scientist that thinks that it may have been possible that one point in the evolutionary history that nature did indeed fool around with the idea of a flying ape or a flying monkey or something along those lines. So whenever you think about something coming into your room, could this be some sort of folk memory or some sort of collective unconscious? If we would go into Jungian psychology, could this be a memory of that sort of creature coming into your room that is extremely human-like, yet is also able to fly, and drink blood and things like that? Something to consider. So as a researcher, as I write these books, I draw on all different beliefs from around the world. And as a cryptozoologist, there, more often than not, there is an unexplained animal behind vampiric incidences rather than a human being that is sucking your blood.
Okay, now, kind of a side tangent question. Vampires, vampire bats. Which came first?
Well,
in other words, I guess I'm wondering about the word.
Right. Well, in order to name the vampire bat, the vampire had to be part of the vernacular. So, whenever the Spanish came in, into that part of the area, southern Texas into Mexico, then they would have brought that loan word with them, of course. Yeah.
Well, see, I did not actually know that, because I thought maybe the bat had been around. They called him the vampire bat, and then when they said, "Oh, wait, that guy's eating humans," they said, "Oh, look, we'll just leave off the bat word."
Right.
I really did not know.
Right. Well, when we talk about creatures that drink blood, the word vampire doesn't appear in literature until the 1700s. So it comes in quite late. We see references to ghouls, and we see references to other type of, nighttime creatures, but never is it considered a vampire until the Age of Enlightenment, until the 1700s. And, these are all great questions, my friend. So, if people are talking about coast to coast and such, these are really pertinent questions that people need to ask. So if you were in Middle Eastern thought, for instance, their idea of the jinn, which is one of these kind of amorphous characters, they fit quite nicely into the vampire phenomenon as well, because these are spirits that are capable of animating dead bodies. They're also found in cemeteries, and they have been known to feed off of the living. So this could indeed be a vampire creature as well, too. But, if you would go back to the very first true vampire, we would have to look at the Judeo-Christian element of the Garden of Eden. According to that tradition, Eve was not Adam's first wife. There you go. The first wife of Adam was, Lilith. And she was this, she was, this is going to be a good word. This is a good 50-cent word. She was made consubstantial with Adam. So she was made from the very earth from which Adam was made. And, she would not be subjugated by the human being, So there was a very sexual nature to this as well, too. So those people that are into vampirism and want to read a highly charged book about vampires and sexuality, you can buy my book entitled On Vampires, and you'll get the R-rated version of this. But so Lilith wanted to have supremacy in her sexual relationship with Adam, and Adam would have none of that. So she was thrown out of Eden, and as the story goes, as she's wandering around the wastelands outside of the garden, she runs into none other than Satan himself, who she then begins to have children with, and these children were born solely to feed off of the offspring of Adam and Eve. So Eve was actually the second wife. She was made from the rib of Adam and thus subservient to him. So if we look for the true vampire in literature and human thought, we would go back to Lilith. But then this creature becomes more of a demonic type of creature rather than a human creature, and then she becomes something called a strigoi, this creature of the night. And
that was a word they used in that other TV show I watched. Go ahead.
There you go. But the Greek word for that would be a strix, Strix. And owls to this very day have that as their scientific name. And if you would look at books of the Bible, they talk about the wastelands being inhabited by these owls. But if you would go back even further, the translation would be that would be the realm of Lilith. So she becomes this kind of creature that a bird-like creature that feeds off the living. Again, this is giving an overview, a very brief overview of this thing, because it's very, very complicated. So I would advise all those people out there that would like to read about this further, get on vampires.
Shameless self-promotion, and of course, my answer to the whole Lilith story.
Bitches be crazy.
Oh, it didn't come out very loud. Anyway, I haven't checked my volume on my sound effect board. Okay, so you've traced the vampire legend back. Of course, okay. There's two ways to look at that. One is as a literary concept. Still, we gotta plug the Bible at 1400 AD when they actually.
I mean, yeah, there's probably parts of the Bible that were starting to be written as early as 3000. Probably.
Well, yeah, okay. See, yeah. That's the hard part because the part they put it all together. I should be clear. I do understand they didn't write it in 1400 AD.
No,
they put it together, but I don't know, not being a biblical scholar, how widespread, how well known the parts that went into it were. So in other words, I don't know how the Lilith story, for example, Adam and Eve, Genesis, I guess, that was pretty much mainstream. The Lilith story, I mean, I'll put it this way. Nobody at my church talked about it. I didn't find out about it, that until years later.
Sure.
How ingrained was that legend that you know of into the popular culture?
The popular psyche at the time. See, another great question. So if you were not Hebrew, okay, in another, this is also Judaic tradition, okay?
Right.
So this is from very learned people. So the common man on the street may not have known this story. But what they would have known is the people surrounding them in Mesopotamia and Babylon, and all these places, the Fertile Crescent. They would have known that there were plenty of gods that demanded blood offerings. So it was just part of the way of life. They knew that the world was inhabited by God, but they also had no problem believing that the world had other gods to them. Which is interesting when we look at the Ten Commandments. It is, you will have no other God before me. It doesn't say that I'm the only God out there. They understood whenever they wrote this that there were other gods out there, and at least in their mindset. Mm-hmm. And the other gods around them were bloodthirsty. They demanded child sacrifice in many ways. And one of the hallmarks in early vampiric traditions was the feeding off of children. Even in the Egyptian mindset, one of the first victims of a vampire was a child. And that's just the way it went. And that goes back to the idea of Lilith, whose offspring fed upon the children of Adam and Eve. So, this may have been a way to personify things such as sudden infant death syndrome. Whenever a parent puts a seemingly healthy child to bed, and the next day it is dead. That's one way of explaining such a thing. But it is also a way of the society looking around them and saying, hey, this is a very dangerous world, and we are not the apex of this world yet. This was a time whenever we were still, being preyed upon by lions. This was a very terrifying time in our development as a civilized culture. But to talk a little bit more about this, that does not have a literary element to it, but a very archaeological element to it. We have to go back to about 14,000 years ago to England, of all places. And there's a cave in England called Go's Cave. It's in Cheddar Gorge, where we get our cheddar cheese from. And in that cave was a pile of bones, deer bones and pig bones and such. But there was also 3 bones of human beings. 2 of them were children. 1 of them was a young adult. And they were processed the same as the other bones. No special reference paid to these bones. They were simply hunted and eaten by other human beings. Now, what makes this extremely ghoulish is they also found 2 chalices made from the skull of a human being, and residue of blood in that skull as well too. So it seemed like no part of the body was wasted, and even the blood was ingested. But this was solely done as a food source because this time we were still part of there were still glaciers covering parts of England. This was very, very hard going, and people were preyed upon by other people. So we would look at the first, what we would call vampiric encounter. This has nothing to do with literature. This has nothing to do with Judeo-Christian tradition. This has to do with a human being needing sustenance, so they turn to other people for prey.
Ew. Everybody,
yeah.
You're watching Scarefest Radio. Commercial break. Do you feel lost in life? Do you seem to be stuck in emotions that are not yours? Is your home not the sanctuary it should be? Contact Spirit Mechanics, where they take a team approach to your metaphysical and spiritual problems. Spirit Mechanics specializes in aura cleansing, stone attunement, attachment removal, and house cleansings. Spirit Mechanics tailors their approach to your individual spiritual path and needs. Find them every month at Lexington, Kentucky's Mystical Fair, mysticalfairlex.com, or on Facebook by searching Spirit Mechanics, that's MECHANIX. Spirit Mechanics, for your spiritual health and well-being. Everyone is talking about CBD oil. Most of us know that CBD is a cannabis compound that has significant medical benefits, but does not make people high. Its benefits include pain relief, anti-seizure properties, anxiety relief, fights cancer, reduces the risk of diabetes, and it is even used as a sleep aid. Blue Leaf Naturals CBD and hemp products are full-spectrum hemp extract oils. They use only hemp grown in Kentucky, supporting Kentucky farmers and businesses and helping you and your family stay healthy and well. Blue Leaf Naturals, created with care from seed to shelf. Visit their website at blueleafnaturals.com. Blue Leaf Naturals, a Kentucky proud company. And welcome back to Scarefest Radio. Don't forget, we have a special deal just for the viewers of this show and people that happen to go to the Scarefest website. BlueLeafNaturals.com. Order your CBD oil. Enter the code SFFREE. Scarefest free. SFFREE. Into the checkout and you will get free shipping. Free shipping for fans of the show and fans of the Scarefest. Now, I do want to do a little shout out. I don't normally do shout outs, but I'm going to do a shout out. Spirit Mechanics. Stephen and Tiffany Happy anniversary. Everybody go to their Facebook page and just blow it the hell up. Just say, I heard on Scareface Radio. So, we're talking about vampires and werewolves with Ronald Murphy. And, now when did the vampire as this horrible, horrible creature that eats babies, when did that culture start to change into this romantic thing? Because now I know back in years ago, you know, they thought people were crawling out of their graves, and so that's where the stake through the heart thing. They nailed them down.
Sure.
It wasn't that the wood stake killed vampires. It held them the hell down.
It held them down. That's right.
But I mean, because even the oldest movie reference I know of, Nosferatu, this was a wretched creature. When did it become a romanticized character? Because I remember reading comic books, the Dracula comic book. Dracula was this Slav, you know, he'd look you in the eye and just, you know, you'd swoon.
Yes, that's right. Well, if you would look at Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that really is the turning point with what we're dealing with here with the vampire. He was not fully human. I mean, it was a human being. A lot of it was based upon Vlad the Impaler, but he was not a romantic character whatsoever. Nosferatu, they could not get the rights for to name it Dracula, so they had to change it and change it just enough so they didn't get sued by the Stokers. That's a true story. So they borrowed from the Russian tell of Nosferatu. So that character Nosferatu is closer to the way Bram Stoker illustrated his Dracula than anything ever put on film. Not Bela Lugosi or anything like that. He does not become a suave character until Bela Lugosi dons the cape. True story. That's just what happens. And it's not until things like Twilight that it becomes extravagant, you know. Now, I will tell you, before we have Dracula, we do have a French work about a lesbian vampire, and she is very, very beautiful, and she is very, very seductive. But we do not have this masculine thing until Bela Lugosi comes around. And for some reason, Bela Lugosi was seen as quite a sex symbol. You know, I don't know if any of you or any of your listeners had ever thought about that, but he was seen as quite the hunk back in the day. And so that's whenever it became associated wholly with that. But, you know, even if you look at Gary Oldman's character in Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know, he was kind of like this steampunk character, but he still had this sexuality. Now, vampires have always been associated with sexuality ever since Lilith. But, you know, not until cinema really grabs a hold of it do we see this overt kind of, you know, sexuality attached to it.
Now, the other thing I wanted, before we get off vampires, I wish I remembered her name, but the vampiric legend, if you will, is still alive and well in places like New Orleans.
Oh, yes.
What are some of the more, I guess I want to say current history? What's going on in the real world vampire community today?
Okay. The last reported exhumation of a vampire was in Romania in 2008. Now, that was the last reported one. So you can imagine what goes on, you know, the deep, dark nights in some sort of backwater town of Romania. People believe that vampires exist. There are people out there that identify with vampires so much that they believe that they are vampires themselves. Now, let's look at the modern day vampire. Some modern day vampires are almost new age. They believe that they feed upon the energy of nature. They believe that they can draw sources from thunderstorms and such. that's a relatively new breed of vampire. There are some people that believe they can feed off of the energy of others. And I'm sure that you or some of your viewers have experienced walking into a room and somebody's in there and automatically you feel kind of drained and zapped.
I believe in psychic vampires.
I do too.
I believe in psychic vampires.
Right. And you also have the sanguine vampires, the typical bloodsuckers. But whenever I was doing this research for this, I did visit people that believed that they were vampires. And I also interviewed a lot of people who were considered hosts. They had no problem with somebody biting them until they drew blood, or using a needle or even a razor blade to open up a vein and drink blood from them. They have no problem doing that whatsoever. So there are people out there in this psychosexual culture of sadomasochism that identifies themselves as vampire and host, and these people usually have a boring Walmart job, and they want to feel empowered, and they want to feel something a little bit different. So you have that. So the reason why you have such an influx of vampires down in New Orleans is part of it does have a voodoo culture to it, without a doubt. This mix of African and European type of ideologies. But of course, you also have Anne Rice, and without Anne Rice, we would not have New Orleans as the epicenter of vampirism in America. But you can go to vampire clubs in New Orleans. You can go to vampire clubs in New York City, and you can also go to vampire clubs in China. I mean, they're all over the world.
Okay, we're gonna get back to werewolves.
Okay.
Now, this is what I kind of teased earlier. I know that. Okay, let's talk about werewolf as the dog man.
Sure.
Now this is something that you actually mentioned, and I think you might have even hedged your bet a little bit on Bigfoot, is the shapeshifter angle. Do you, historically, where did the human becomes wolf, where did that part come in? And do you give it any credence, and does it still go on today?
Researching, the first evidence that I've ever found of a person transforming into an animal, unfortunately, it wasn't a wolf. It was into an elk creature, was taken from a cave about 35,000 years ago in France. So we do have the idea that ancient man saw that there was a possibility of changing from man into an animal. It would be so much spectacular if it was a guy changing into a wolf. But if you would look at Native American tradition, like I said, I'm in Western Pennsylvania. Throughout the Ohio Valley, there are many Indian tribes that have the idea that their ancestors were wolves, or that through some sort of shamanic trance they could shapeshift into wolves. So that is part of the tradition of a lot of Native American beliefs, not only here in the Ohio Valley but throughout. If you look at Kachina dolls from the Plains Indians, you see the werewolf very well represented as somebody that's wearing the mask of a wolf and taking on the attributes of a wolf. So that is something that's pretty common in indigenous folk beliefs. Again, are we dealing with a shamanic belief? Are we thinking that this is something that transformation takes place solely inside the head? Or is it something that people believe that there's an actual transformation going on? When we think of the Viking culture, we think of the berserker, the bear skin. That's where that word comes from. But there was also berserkers that would wear the skin of wolves, and they were known as the drinkers of blood because they would take on the attributes of the wolf and prey upon their enemy, so to speak. Of course, a lot of this had to do with some sort of psychedelic drug, getting everybody hyped up on this kind of cadence of what they should be in battle, in the heat of battle and everything. So it's very complicated from a psychological point of view why they believed in such things. But if you would look at instances throughout history of people that believed that they were vampires or believed in werewolves, again, I keep on saying vampires, it usually resulted in some sort of deal with the devil, and they would wear some part of a wolf in order to establish the transformation. The belt of a wolf, the hide of a wolf, or a belt made out of a wolf, or the hide of a wolf would allow this transformation to take place. There was this one person who was called the Werewolf of Bedburg, and that was in Germany in the 1500s. And he hunted and killed livestock, and he also had a taste for fetuses. So he would kill pregnant women and take the fetus out of the womb in order to devour it. Now, he is what you would call now a serial killer, but back in the day, he was believed to be a werewolf, and he said that he made a deal with the devil in order to become a werewolf.
You got some sick stories, dude. You got some sick stories.
I do, and I'm saving the worst ones for Scarefest. So you have to come out for that. Yes.
Hey, everybody, we're going to take our final commercial break. We're going to come back and I just got a little bit more about the Bigfoot and Dog Man and werewolves.
Great.
Coyote Chris Sutton.
Shamanism.
Spiritual advisement.
Paranormal investigations.
Inspirational presentations.
Bringing light to the darkest places for over 20 years. Go to coyotechris.com to learn more. And welcome back to the final segment of Scarefest Radio. Do not forget our new sponsor, Akashic Awareness, a metaphysical healing and learning center unlike any other in Kentucky. Large selection of crystals, gems, and minerals greet you the minute you walk in the door, about the time Raven, the dog, greets you with her tail wagging. But it is a metaphysical center, people. This is not a store where you go in to pick up your latest rock. They have pyramid therapy, biomat, aura cloud, pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, ionic foot detox, earthing, color therapy, emotion. They got all kinds of stuff for all of your metaphysical needs. Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Check them out at akashicawareness.com. Okay, back to werewolves. So this is where I'm going to get you as a paranormal enthusiast. Okay, let's forget about the historical researcher for just a moment.
Okay.
Do you? I don't want to say do you believe. How open are you to the idea that what we call the Dog Man is in fact your classic werewolf that is a person during the day? How open are you to that ideology?
Well, extremely open. Okay. I'm a skeptic because whenever you write about such outlandish things, it requires a great deal of evidence to prove.
Fair enough.
You know, you can't just take this with a grain of salt. However, that being said, I've talked to so many people who have had encounters with what we would call dogmen, and obviously they were not lying. So something is going on out there. I have a track in my collection that you'll have to come down to Scarefest to see, which is a huge track of a purported dogman. Now, the person that was the witness to this track claims that it was a human being that transformed into an animal, and that was the track that was left behind. It's a massive track. You can see the claws on it. I've had people say that it probably is a bear track, but here in Western Pennsylvania, we do not have bear that size. It looks like a huge grizzly track. And I know the person that cast this track, and it's only about 15 miles away from where I live right now. So there's something strange going on out there. So strange that it's leaving behind evidence. I would say about 2 months ago, there was a rash of attacks at a llama farm whenever llamas were being taken down and having their throats ripped out. Something very big was capable of doing this, and we don't have anything in a part of Western Pennsylvania to do that. But interestingly enough, Pennsylvania has what is called a dogman triangle, which is this kind of focused werewolf activity, if you will, or dogman activity. People don't like to talk about the idea of transformation. I do. I think that if we're talking about something that seemingly operates in the realm of what we would call the werewolf, then we have to at least investigate it, even if it seems so far-fetched. One thing I have to point out, though, is that, we don't get to see very many photographs of these things, and we don't get to see we don't see any dead bodies of these things. Is it because that we're talking about a human being that is capable of transformation, and it's only in this state of this bestial state for a very limited time? I mean, that's something to consider as a paranormal investigator. If we're talking about ghosts and we're talking about, extraterrestrials that are flying, millions of light years to get here, then why can we not talk about a human that is able to assume the form of a bipedal dog-like creature that we call the dogman? I think it's something to consider.
And that, everybody, is the full circle that I was going to get back to Bigfoot, because the question in the chat room is, of course, common question, why haven't we ever found a body?
Yes.
What if, I'm going to do History Channel on you. What if Bigfoot is very similar? I mean, people have talked about, is this a trans-dimensional being?
Right.
What if it's just a shapeshifter of some type?
My newest book was published just a week ago, and it is entitled On Fairies. Now, we'll have to talk about this someday, my friend, because it's a fascinating topic. I have extensively went through fairy lore around the globe, starting with as far back as I could possibly go up into contemporary thought. And all fairy lore revolves around the notion of shape-shifting, the ability to take on another form. So as a paranormal researcher, is it possible that what we're talking about when we're talking about Dogman or Bigfoot or the Jersey Devil or the Mothman, is it possible that we're talking about the same creature, the same type of energy that is simply able to assume a multitude of forms? Or what happens if it doesn't actually assume forms, but it's able to project in your mind and make you think that it's changing forms? That's hard. That's hard to photograph, isn't it? Yeah, that's hard to photograph.
Yeah, now now you've piqued my interest, and we're almost out of show. I love fairies. I believe in fairies. I think, but at the same time, no, not the guy up in Indiana that's walking around graveyards photographing lightning bugs. I believe in your traditional, magical, if you will, mystical fairy. This has been a fascinating conversation tonight, Ronald. And everybody, if you have any interest at all in cryptozoology, I can already tell this is the seminar to take in this year at the Scarefest.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I'm looking forward to meeting you, my friend. I'm looking very much forward to getting back to Kentucky, one of my favorite places in the world. I cannot wait to be there. And, I'm just excited about seeing everybody, and let's talk about, strange things that go bump in the night.
And there are plenty of them, and then people like me that bump back. Okay, everybody, this has been Scarefest Radio. We'll see you next week.